Hi, Jeff. You've gone silent.
I done mute myself.
That's better. I can hear you. Oh, we can go back to those Dulcet Jones comments as well. Now I hear them.
Oh, that's good. I'm here. I'm here for you, buddy.
um, First of all, good to see you again. I do so enjoy these chats.
Yes, you as well. Hopefully, Jonathan can join us. We
Yeah,
we we changed the time to try to accommodate him, but I don't think he got the message. So he'll probably we'll be seeing him here
he's off message.
about halfway. He's off message. So,
Okay, so going to talk about chapter 5. Let's just give us a little taster of one of the most interesting, or perhaps even you could say a favorite part for you of this chapter. What might that be?
I think overall, I'm seeing in a way that I have never seen before the way he's building this existential organism. It's not just a thought organism; it's an experiential. Uh, um, and in order to engage in it, you have to have all of the processes of observation of oneself and others while they're speaking. And um, it's. I told my wife this morning that it's a little bit like uh, pushing snow that accumulates that keeps accumulating and keeps accumulating, and by this time I'm reading every sentence and then stopping and thinking and writing and thinking, writing, and I can't not. It's so existentially whole,
Mm.
yet not yet even where it's going to be whole. So this time, I think the thing that really struck me is of um, the addition of the percept to the sequence of observation uh, to thinking. So everything started in the previous two chapters with observation and thinking. Thinking then becomes the ground for everything that that we can say about anything, and operationally, it's the thing that we're doing all the time. And in a sense, it's outside of time. It appears to be. Of course, that's not been quite established yet. It appears to be universal, and in the center of this chapter, he claims thinking as the universal process. And so um, that's and you're there with him. I wasn't there with him the first time I read through this time. I was like, hey, that's a claim. Why? How can you make that claim? You just dropped out of the sky with that. That's not right. That's not fair. I mean, I think it's true, and I gave a theoretical of on volley theoretical picture of um, the world as originating out of what it is we call thinking as our experience. So that the word in the sense of the logos and in the beginning
In the beginning, yeah.
is is in, is inherent to existence, and and I posited also that we have percepts, which is something he added again in this chapter. We have percepts we because because it inherently thinking gives rise that which we call thinking gives rise to individuated reality. Now it doesn't give rise to the connectivity, and I loved that he walked us into that room of percepts. And some will say, well, that's the relationless aggregate is nowhere actually to be found, or it's
Mm-hmm.
a pure observation. But he's not talking about observation. He's talking about perception, which is different than observation. You can observe something
Exactly.
without
Yep.
without perceiving many things in the field of your perception. It's a cognitive activity that is on one side of the sequential process of thinking, but it's not thinking as a whole. It's an aspect of thinking that discerns, and you can't see patterns until you till you discern or perceive differentiated reality. So differentiation doesn't mean separate. It potentially means unity, and but we find ourselves at a point where that perception is that the patterns and connectivity of all that which is differentiated is not given. Just the percept is given. And I love that. And then I love that, and it's very daunting. And I love that then he establishes an inner and an outer life via this process. So we go from this reality of the world that appears to be outside us, and then we take that percept and we put it into our own subjective experience. And not only is that subjective experience, let's say, a necessary sequence, and this is where, of course, predominant thinking of our times, as represented in critical idealism, suggests that that's just our mental picture, and that we can't really know that differentiated perceptual field, how it originates, or what the pattern that unites it is. Like we can't know that, but if we notice that percept that is subjective changes our subjective self, it alters our subjective self, and that we're participating in this process of the alteration of our subjective self, then this ego, the I, is no longer an abstract thing or an identity even. It's an ever evolving reality based on the experiences that I can bring to the table, because he uses the table as the thing. I think there's a stroke of genius in that, that if you lay things out on the table, that there's a table of water, the table holds things, and it's a great medium for talking about this inner and outer experience. So I'd say that's a long riff on
there are lots of favorite bits. I think that's what you're trying to tell us.
Yes.
But what you've done, and this is what he does consistently in the book, is you've linked them together through thinking. These, although they came through time as individual ideas, in you, they live as a whole. And this is also another aspect of thinking that we if we actually talk about that example that he gives in the book, this continual unconscious connecting that we do with our thinking, not understanding the consequences of doing that. Might have sounded a bit abstract, but in my mind it was a clear thought, and this is always the battle, isn't it? We've all got like different levels of clarity on different aspects of this book, but then actually turning that into clear wording, clear images that manage to convey to other people, that is a huge challenge in itself. And the fact that we're doing these videos, and the fact that so many people try to read the philosophy of freedom and end up giving up after one or two chapters, is just further evidence for the fact that this is a process. This is a long process. So you don't just get it and then you're done and dusted. We are, as Steiner tells us, we're creating a region of the soul where freedom will be found, and where secure knowledge, or a correct understanding of what true knowledge is established.
It's creation too, right? I mean, that's there's a couple words there. One is that we're creating, we're participating in creation, say, and that's a loaded term, right? Because then in the States that might mean fundamentalist Christian right-wing dogma or something, that creation is this and that evolution is this, and they're hyper realities that are static. But that's not what we mean, just to be clear. We're not talking about that, although this work is I would say, well, I'm not going to say it actually. I don't want to. It'll come out. It would be a spoiler. But I wanted to say that also the word that you mentioned, is consequential or consequence. And we touched upon this last time as relates to the good and bad epistemologies, say, and the way in which science, or the way in which materialism, critical idealism, utilizes its understandable in a new way for me now, but false limitations on knowledge, to use plausible deniability as relates to consequences. And I think that we're going to find that consequentiality is something in this work that dawns on us as possible in a completely new way, because we're involved in the creation, we know the consequence of that creation. Not all of the consequences, each individual, but the more people who are engaged in this kind of activity, the more those perspectives will provide a mutual picture of that consequence.
Okay, so you've touched on what for me is a really important topic, and something that's become more obvious to me. There's two directions my description can go now. I'll just quickly mention one before delving into the other. The fact that we are doing this as a group of people, which Max talked about in the chat yesterday, I think is highly significant. Certainly appears to me we experience the same thing when we're reading the riddles of philosophy. There's a higher level of engagement, which actually means that we're obviously doing a lot more work, like you were describing. I'm reading a line, stopping and pausing and reflecting before reading the next line. Is one aspect of it, but I do experience that there is something beyond that as well. It's not just the extra effort that I'm putting in, but this group work that we're doing is adding a completely new dimension. Anyway, so one of the things that has become extremely obvious for me with like multiple careful readings this week is how, with his examples, Steiner is really pointing to how the difference between people who think they're thinking and people who are thinking consciously. I reread chapter 4. I had a specific reason to do it, and I decided to do it in German also for a specific reason, which is not so important here. But suddenly it just like jumped out of the page for me why he goes through these seemingly laborious descriptions and redescriptions. Because if you look at the Spencer example in chapter 4, he shows like the Spencerian, sort of the common way of viewing the situation with the partridge, so like in the grass. And then when in his description, he adds in all the details, so like where subconscious thinking activity is happening. People are not aware of it. Spencer is not aware of it. And Steiner is pointing this out time and time again. You've missed a part. You've missed how the activity of thinking is interacting with the perception that is going on here. And this is for me one of the essences. The book is called The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, amongst other things. To get to know this spiritual activity, we have to recognize it in everyday situations. And rereading him and again, it becomes so obvious how he's doing that. And a trivial example from my week. It's like it's like between lessons. So I go to the toilet, and I stare at there's this piece of silver. It's a piece of plumbing basically, and it's not silver. It's chrome, and I'm sort of like staring at it, and then I wake up in my staring and realize I've identified what that piece is, but that has come from thinking. Do you know what I mean? So I'm consciously awaking to this process, because normally in that situation I'll just go, oh, that's a blah blah blah. and that's a blah, 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 and it does this. But instead, the process is becoming separated out. There's perception, and this is what thinking is adding to perception so that it becomes observation.
Yes.
I think you might have... Go on.
That was good. That was good. I would suggest here, I keep thinking about this, but I haven't even written it down until now. During this, it is that one is reminded of the nominalists here, right? Because you have all of this differentiated perceptual world, and we are limited in our ability, at least I am, in recognizing the way it's all connected and patterned together. And so it's easy to stop there. It's easy to say, well, everything has a name, but names don't mean anything because they're just names. You know, it's just language, and language itself is just metaphorical. And
just bolted on. Reality is reality. It doesn't need language to describe it.
Yeah, right. And these sorts of things, and by default, it doesn't need thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you want to be a nominalist, then you can stop at the relationless aggregate, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important, and also I think of the process in from biblical terms of the naming of things, the point at which that is an important part of a process, because once you name them, you can see the way in which there's an underlying archetypal reality that connects them. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why Lucifer's jealous of us, isn't it?
I mean, I know why he's jealous of me. Why is he jealous of you?
No, there's that apocryphal story, isn't there, of God talking to Lucifer and Adam. You know the story? No, it's a careful reading of Genesis 2 and 3 is this isn't exactly it, but within Christian communities, it's like going back a long time. This chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis got interpreted into the story that God sort of like called Lucifer and Adam for a little, let's say for a cup of tea. And Lucifer is sort of like saying to God, why are you sort of like giving all this tension to these sort of like these scummy human beings? They're not up to much. Look at me, I'm fantastic, and they're nothing. I'm hamming it up a little bit here because I'm sure he didn't use language like that. But so God says to Lucifer, so okay, what's that over there? And God points to a zebra. And Lucifer looks at it and says, oh, that's an animal. And then he asks Adam, and he says, okay, Adam, what's that over there? He said, well, that's a zebra, and that's part of the horse family, and blah, 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 blah. He goes on to describe it. And then they look at another animal. Let's say it's a lion. Doesn't really matter. The point that's being made is, so Lucifer looks at the lion, and God asks him, what's that? He said, that's an animal as well. And Adam's like, yeah, that's a lion. That's part of the cat family. And so, like, again, able to go into details. And God basically ends the conversation by saying, that's what humanity can do, and you can't. And it's to do with this naming aspect. Hallowed be thy name in the second line of the Lord's Prayer. It can seem like a random slight thing you just chuck into a prayer, but a deeper look at like the esoteric underpinnings of why it's there get back to this central point that you're indicating there. The naming of things is something that we can do and animals cannot. Why? Because they don't have thinking consciousness living in them like we do. This universal activity, this spiritual activity does not live in them in a conscious way, and therefore they don't need to develop a language for it. They don't need to be able to like identify different types of trees. They can instinctually do that, but they don't develop a whole language and abstract concepts to describe these things.
Well, they also can't be transfixed by their own um, self-created delusion, say.
Yeah.
Like, so I think I was thinking in this chapter of Narcissus in a slightly new way, as we take the deeply personal, um, uh, as we move into the deeply personal relationship with the way in which percepts alter our world, and in the way in which we participate in that process. But if you stay in this in the self-limiting, this is what I think the Greeks were or probably the oral tradition came from a deeper well than the Greeks in the Narcissus myth, but it's articulated there, and it's articulated very specifically as a denial of the soul, right? So the cool Duke is walking through the woods, with a pale look, a sort of gothic, sort of hipster, and a certain sort of maybe a cynical air, perhaps, I know better than thou kind of deal. And the beautiful Psyche comes to him and whispers, and he denies 3 times. I think he denies the Psyche. He denies Psyche. He denies soul. He denies that which would give him an experience of the way in which he is connected and the world is a beautiful patterned unity, and instead he sits by a body of water and sees only his reflection, but he doesn't know it's his reflection, even, because he's disconnected from his own soul. It's just a percept. And so he becomes absolutely transfixed by the percept. And if that's not a picture of the world we're living in, and a world that I live in, like the thing that came clear in this chapter is that we are these points of view. This is why he doesn't, though he dismantles critical idealism as an argument, which is dominant in our time, and it's an argument that wishes to persuade. It's a devilish argument that wishes to coerce and persuade. But the reason why it doesn't sweep it aside completely, as a state of consciousness, say, or a stage of consciousness, or a station of consciousness, is that he will not refute. He refuses to refute the conclusions because they are real. All of these perspectives are real, and they're really important in the process of coming to have this experience beyond the pale reflections of the surface waters of life, right?
Yeah. And as you say that, what comes through like loud and clearly in my thinking is, we touched on this a few talks ago about the 12 worldviews. It's all of these worldviews, realism, idealism, and the other isms there, they all have a level of validity. The danger is in believing that one of them is the correct one and that all the others are incorrect. It's this flexibility of soul, this ability to see things from world events from the 12 different perspectives that gives us that inner freedom, or is part of that inner freedom.
I'm that really came alive. Like I've thought about it in those terms from an abstract intellectual standpoint, the 12 points of view, and he deals with say Berkeley and the neo-Kantian point of view, which is, in my opinion, spiritism and materialism. But it really came alive when Kate said, "I'm a naive realist," right? And I totally I see that. Like, I'm a naive realist too, and I'm a critical idealist, and I'm a transcendental illusionist, and I'm all of those things. It's and too much by default, I would suggest.
Yeah, we need to create that inner mobility of soul so that we don't get stuck in those points of views when they become limiting.
Yes, and we need to understand how important they are to to well, I don't want to get ahead because the mental picture here is starting to come to the fore. What the mental picture's role?
Should we go for the start 25 minutes into the video?
Do what?
Go for the start of our talk now.
Oh, is this where we are?
Yeah. So what we're going to try and cover these points today. That was a very long and interesting intro. These are some of the highlights that I've picked out from chapter 5. Steiner's going into what mediated knowledge is and the problems that it creates, and this has to do with mental pictures a lot. He's still there a lot, and he's going to develop this concept just like more clearly both through this chapter and into the next chapter. We start talking in this chapter about further consequences. So we talked about Berkeley and Kant in the previous chapter, and here we're talking about von Hartmann specifically for the transcendental realisms. Like, what are the consequences of in philosophy for believing that we have mediated knowledge, and or that, sorry, more specifically, everything is mediated knowledge, and therefore what can we know about the world? That's the type of thing. And that's, he then starts talking about the waking and the dreaming life. He's also like trying to prepare us. He's been preparing our thinking for this idea that there is an aspect of our soul that can wake up to their mediated knowledge. There is a region of the soul where we have an experience that is unmediated, is where he's going to take us after taking us into this world of like waking and dreaming. He talks more about what you already mentioned in conversation here, this important fundamental realization that percept and perception is nothing without thinking. It's obviously, it's real. It creates sensory impressions within us, light, sound, etc. And then also we have like interior ones like mental pictures and memory and feelings and will. But all of these things don't inform us about the world until we bring thinking to them. We can't say anything about the world without thinking, which is a refrain we come back to quite often, because it's an essential, it's a keystone of Steiner's thinking, which is, in my mind, is irrefutable. I don't see any way around that argument. And if somebody's got an argument against it, they'll have to use thinking to prove that they're right, and therefore they will disprove themselves. For me, it is that simple. But perhaps it isn't that simple, but I can't see how anybody can work their way around that. Okay, and then we talk about, so he brings up Spinoza again, indirectly, but also if we get into this discussion, I think there's a secondary purpose of bringing in Spinoza's stone. He talks about a percept being inherent in the flight of a stone that's been thrown. It's like it will describe a parabola. And this, I think this can also be understood on a couple of levels. And then we get to, he talks quite exhaustively about time and space, and my experience of and that becomes then a very interesting conversation on the finite and the infinite, which is more or less where he finishes off the chapter. So let's this mediated knowledge. What's how can we start a conversation around that? What do you think he meant by mediated knowledge?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. He mentions that the mental picture is the thing that we place between our outer and inner world, say. But he also says that mental picture is a subjective percept. And then it's in the next chapter he's going to call it an individualized concept, which are two different things, which is a bit of a mystery. But in the meantime, he means that we don't have immediate knowledge. If we did, then we wouldn't be talking right now, because there'd be nothing to talk about, because we'd have no desire to figure things out. We would just know, right? So we are by hook or crook organized such that our knowledge is mediated by a process. And so that process is the one we've been describing, actually, which is to take a percept into the sort of cross the threshold into an internal life, which is what he establishes a real internal and a real external life, as opposed to, trying to locate something inside myself. Like we talk about that all the time, unthinkingly, but he's thinking through the way in which we become. And I would just a point of nitpickiness, maybe. I don't think he's taking us anywhere. I think that he's going himself into these regions phenomenologically, and and we're side by side with him if we choose to be. Right. So otherwise it sounds a little bit guru-ish, and this is like calling Beethoven guru. It's not. Either you go into the music or you don't.
You choose to listen and to his experience, to his description, just like you read a book. You're living with the imagination of somebody for a while, aren't you?
Well, and either it's a deeply personal experience or it's not. But any work of art can't be entered into unless it's done with deep personal commitments and vulnerabilities as relates to what it is that is uncovered there, and the process of uncovering. And so so this mediated knowledge is a necessary step in the process of knowledge. And so what we're talking about is a subjective self that is crucial to knowledge, not to be regarded as secondary. It's absolutely crucial. That to me is what that the significance of mediated knowledge is. Not that it's an absolute.
I think one of the things he's trying to tease out is this old idea that the external world is of a different nature from us. And I was listening to Brian Gray, one of his talks on YouTube, and he describes it as sort of like, it's as if to know what a chicken is, we have to let the chicken sort of like enter us. Only then can we really know what a chicken is. And this very graphic image that he gives there, I think, also manages to convey this idea that these philosophers, so like, who place that's the thing the thing in itself, this thing I see, outside of us, they say it belongs to a completely different realm, and that realm cannot enter into us. And so when we have our mental pictures, we're not seeing the truth. We're looking in a mirror. And he actually uses this image, or whether he used this image or not, I know that's what I drew in my notes, because I like to add pictures to my notes to clarify some key points. But this idea that's like we can only have indirect knowledge or mediated knowledge of the world. This is the fundamental presumption of these two currents that we're going to look at. We've got Illusionism and Transcendentalism. And if you believe, as these philosophers who adhere to these ideas, if you believe that we only can ever have mediated or indirect, because I think that in German the word is mittelbar and unmittelbar, which gives this idea of it happening through a medium, but I think the translation in English is direct and indirect. Is Wilson, isn't it? In the English translation, I think he uses these words. So perhaps perhaps it would have been better to talk about indirect knowledge rather than mediated, therefore, for clarity's sake. But the essential point is that if we have indirect or mediated knowledge, Jonathan's here.
Hi guys.
Hello, Jonathan.
Are you live? Hello.
We're in full flow. Just join us and comment, okay?
Okay.
Good to see you out in the sun. Illusion. Yeah. So what are the natural consequences of never being able to directly know the world? One is illusionism. We can never, no knowledge of the world is possible. We're living in this dream. And so like anybody who thinks we can have knowledge in the world of the world is in themselves delusional, because they haven't understood the fundamental nature or the fully fledged consequences of only ever knowing mediated indirectly. And then we have Transcendental Realism, which is where he really looks into Hartmann and says that, well, that what they say is, okay, we'll compromise. We know we can't have direct knowledge, but we might be able to learn a thing or two through looking in the mirror. It's a distorted mirror, but we can draw conclusions. We will never know reality, but like hook or crook, it was the phrase you used earlier. We might be able to draw some type of conclusions, but never with any certainty. I think that's what's going on for me there with the discussion between or with the description of illusionism and transcendentalism. Did you see anything else there?
No, that's a really good. Well, we haven't really touched on transcendental realism quite, I don't think, but he even says, well, I'll just leave that aside. This really screws into Hume and Kant. Like, I'm not just talking about Kantian, neo-Kantianism, but Hume and Kant themselves, and the way in which, particularly from Hume, the idea of knowledge being something that could be only attained by something like experimentation, like, because you end up with predictability and probability, and so if your model predicts, then your probability model is accurate enough to work. And the danger here isn't that that's not effective. It's also important to see how damn effective it is, because at first it just seems like these are intellectual concepts, and why would anybody think that if they could actually think, or yeah, that's kind of the way it is, and we do the best we can, and thinking is an addendum to life, and it's abstraction, but we can use it in this pragmatic way. But the problem there again goes to consequentiality, as we were talking about to begin with. If all knowledge is only predictability and probability, and that's the scientific endeavor, then we've absolutely subjectified knowledge itself by trying to completely objectify the world.
I've just had a thought, and I was just looking. It's like the next point, la vida es sueño, life is a dream, and I might as well tell this story. It's a story I've told a few times to a few friends, But there's nothing embarrassing in it, so I can sort of like share it with you and whoever watches this video. This thing about life as a dream. This was a play written in the 1600s by Calderón de la Barca. But you also see these ideas reflected in Shakespeare. This is when the world is beginning to wake up to this question of, how do I know that experience is reality really what I think it is, or am I just dreaming? And this is essential, this waking up through thinking. This is, for me, this is an essential part of this book. It's another very important area. But so to the story. So I'm going to guess that I was about 11 or 12 years old. And one morning I woke up and I'd had this strong dream, and it was an interesting dream. And now 40 plus years later, I can't remember any of the details of it. But I remember waking up and so I think, well, that's an interesting dream. And I probably had lots of other interesting dreams that weren't so, that haven't stayed in my memory. And the second morning I woke up and I had this experience. Oh, that's strange. That dream that I've just come out of was a continuation of what I'd been dreaming about the previous night. And it was sort of like this, there was something real about it, but it was just a dream. And then the third morning I woke up and I realized that I had continued to have that dream. It's like that dream, just like in a story, it had continued to evolve. It's according to its own logic. And on that third morning, I remember asking myself the question, Angus, which is reality? The one that you've just come out of, where there's cause and effect, there's a consistency, there's an evolution through time. That's where you just come from. In the last 3 mornings, you've woken up to see these threads, or the one that you've just woken up into, so what we normally call reality. And I don't know how many other people have had similar experiences, but for me, it was one of those striking experiences. A young person, and I didn't have any conceptual framework to deal with it, but the ingenuity of the question, which is the reality, I think this is part of what is being reflected here in. It's getting us to think seriously about, is there a way of also waking up from what we call normal reality? Quite clearly, it's when I was 11, 12 years old and that was going on, I was waking up to this reality. There's no doubt about that. But Steiner is positing the idea that, and we're going to look at some perhaps, if we've got time, some quotes from the Upanishads a little bit later today. But there's this idea that we can also wake up from life. And I think this is for me one of the striking parts of this chapter, because it seems weird talking about illusionism, transcendentalism, and then talking about a burning sensation in your throat due to drinking wine, and a dream becomes waking up to a cough. Okay, how does that figure? But I think he's trying to encourage us to think more deeply about what is the relationship of the waking state to the thinking state. And when we begin to draw our own conclusions about that, we will find a similarity to the percept and thinking. This is part of where he's building up to, but we won't get all the way there until the 6th chapter of how this waking up clearly happens, and how it all relates to this critical idealism and naive realism part. That hasn't been stated explicitly yet, but it's coming. Yeah.
As relates to this and the two previous points, the question comes to me. He makes this. It's in this chapter that he makes the statement that I brought in way back in a previous conversation too early. That observation is to the percept as intuition is to thinking.
Yep.
And so it seems to me that the percept and intuition are tied together, or perception and intuition are tied together intimately, but are separate at first. Or maybe observation and intuition are tied together, but obviously, well, we haven't even got into what intuition is yet fully.
Let me, if it's one of the questions that's like being top of mind for me this week is, what's the difference between observation and perception? So I've really been burrowing and trying to get like distinct, it's like clear answers as to what Steiner's view is, because he's using these as technical terms in this text. So for him, there is clearly a difference, and if we can understand that, then that'll make understanding what he's trying to say easier. And it is actually really as simple, if I've understood it correctly, that observation is just the meeting of thinking with perception, with percepts, in the sense that we direct our attention to specific areas of perception due to thinking. So it's I went to like German websites, I went to English websites, and so I was trying to mix it. And one of these key ideas is that if you're ever going to talk about science, you've got to direct your attention to a certain area of phenomena, or to certain areas of perception, and that's where you focus your thinking. And this is how I understand he means observation. Observation is perception plus thinking. Do you agree with that? Do you think you might have something different, or can you add something there?
So repeat that last bit. Observation is perception plus thinking?
Yeah, percept. Oh, sorry. Yeah, percept plus thinking. Yeah. Because a percept is the object of observation, whereas perception is the act of. That's like the difference going on there. You've just got muted again.
If I were a listener, that's okay. If I were a listener, I would ask, well, where does attention play a role? Is attention synonymous with observation? I have to choose my attention. I intentionally have to direct it. So you have to have already separated something out of all the perceptual phenomena that's coming in, the perceptual, the impressions. It's like the sight, the sound, the inner perceptions, feelings, temperature, all of these type of things. Right, but those are all concepts. So I first have to direct my attention, and that is an act of discernation. So it's already an act of perception to attend to something. You've already made the willful choice to attend to one thing and not the other. So it seems to me I guess in observation there is potentially intuition, but intuition isn't given to observation. But it is in some sense given to perception. So I'll give you an example. Steiner talks about the 12 senses, right? And the higher senses are the sense of eye, the sense of concept, the sense of tone, and the sense of hearing. But I want to focus on concept, because if it's a sense, then it's a perceptual activity. If I'm perceiving a concept, then it's already knowledge. It's already a knowing, right? If I'm perceiving anything, it's actually a knowing. And it's to perceive warmth is to know warmth to a certain extent. Now, does it go to the physics of warmth or whatever? No, it doesn't. But it is an immediate knowing, immediate, unmediated. Yeah. So it seems to me that attention precedes even observation, because you can't observe something you're not attending to. I mean, you can, but you wouldn't end up with a percept, right? You don't have to have a percept when you observe. You don't have to notice. You can watch the billiard balls, and you don't even have to say. You don't even have to discern any of the. You don't have to differentiate anything. So there's a differentiation process that's occurring even before we take it in. Take it in as a percept internally.
But all that, let's stick with the billiards table there that you're talking about. So even we don't think consciously about the fact that we are dividing up the world according to, for example, colors on a billiard table. But that is an act of thinking. We've taken sensory information and we've decided to run it through the filter of different colors. You can do this experiment with yourself. So like you're sitting in a room and you're not thinking about much, and just choose a color and think of the color yellow, and then start looking around the room around you, and all the yellow starts popping out. And if you choose another color, and that color starts popping out, it was always there, but you didn't notice it. And this is how we can use thinking to sharpen our observation of the world, by targeting it. So on the billiard, back to the billiard table, so you can dice the world up into different colors. You can dice it up into what other you've got, so like the physics going on, angles and velocity and elasticity, as to like concepts that you bring to that billiard table that sort of like help you focus your attention. So you might be sort of like intrigued as to why a certain how a certain, let's say, call it a pool table trick happens. At first it's a mystery. It might be a mystery to you, especially if you're not a pool player. But if you so you've already got your it's like essentials of observation going on there. You recognize colors and you recognize a cue and these type of things. But then you start to study it more attentively, and then you discover a new aspect that you'd never known about in pool. I used as a trivial example this when we talked about chapter 3. I said, imagine you didn't know about the concept of spin, and then suddenly, so like you begin to you see evidence of spin. You might first think, oh, why is he not hitting it dead center with the cue? But then, I mean, then this creative act. This is a very simplistic way. It would be a lot better if I could, perhaps during the conversation, I can come up with a more obvious example of how a creative process happens within us. But this understanding of spin begins to develop. But initially, it comes as a bit of as a eureka moment. It comes as a aha, I didn't know about that, and now I do, and now it enables me to understand something that's coming to me from the from the perceptual world. And Steiner does talk about how life is about not all of life, but thinking life is about acquiring ever more concepts with which to view the world. And I think this is part of what's going on in the observation process. But these concepts grow, they require observation, but intuition is the magic source, or it's the divine entering into us and revealing its conceptual truth.
I want to add a couple things. One has to do with the will, but I want to bookmark that because another one occurred as I was just listening to that last bit. So as relates to this saying, if I'm connecting outer differentiated perceptual field of attention, and I'm connecting, I'm using thinking, right? I'm using thinking to make the connections between these, and hopefully I'm perceiving patterns. Not hopefully, I would suggest I'm perceiving patterns that are unifying, that are something like the thinking that I'm applying. That's my claim. It's a theory at this point. And when he talks about previously, when he talks about how we think about concepts is through intuition. So we do the same thing. We're walking through the world, except it's not objects now. Now it's concepts within our frame. This is what you're talking about, is the more concepts you have, assuming they're not dead concepts or beliefs or the artifacts of thinking, but actually are alive with a sort of amplification of thinking, or a particular archetypal a window through which one can look. You're selecting from a field of concepts. Yep, so you're connecting a pattern of concepts with intuition, and so that's what and he uses the term in this chapter, conceptual intuition. Now, when I forgot to bring this up in the book group, but this question for me is, conceptual intuition is just one kind of intuition. So there's that. Okay, I want to leave that there because
hold on. No, you've got to unpack that. I want to know what you're talking about.
I don't think we can actually talk about it until we're really fleshing out what it is the mental picture is.
Okay,
and because I think that it is the bridge that gives us the world. To some extent, the mental picture is. It is no.
Okay, yeah,
a little. I'm just. This is my.
You're giving teasers now, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right, baby. So the other thing I wanted to bring in here is that we really this comes alive as relates, if people think that. Are watching and think that, or approach this work and think that thinking is just a dry intellectual activity, and that the ground of existence can't be based on that, and even if it were a part of life, it's a sort of a radiation or an outgassing or something like that, and but when I didn't intend to do this, but when bringing attention to the table, you realize that the will is involved in thinking, that the soul reality of the soul, S-O-U-L, soul reality, the psyche reality, is that the will is very much involved in thinking. Now he ends the last chapter, maybe the previous one, saying that, and but he also uses in another place this image that it seems like a claim now, but it seemed like a revelation then, which is that some people say that thinking is dry and abstract and all that, but I say that you can also say that thinking gives you, that no, thinking has feeling and willing in it. Now we don't have the excuse me, we don't have the feeling here. Oh, this comes full circle.
That's coming. It's coming soon, though, isn't it?
It's only a this is only a tease again.
Yep.
The mental picture is key to this aspect of it, because in this chapter he only says the mental picture is an individualized, is a subjective percept, not an individualized percept. It's a subjective percept. So the mental picture is key to the way the feeling life lives in thinking, right? Okay, so that's a tease. But he does bring the will in here without being explicit about that. That here's the way the will. Well, that's what we're bringing in actually with thinking. He doesn't. It must be implied here somewhere, but he doesn't use the term attention.
But I think we've got Schopenhauer sneaking in again in this chapter, and I do think, for me, it's still a bit of a mystery how he's using Schopenhauer. He basically cuts his legs off at the end of chapter 4 and sort of like says Schopenhauer is. It's like when he talks about, I can see the sun with the eyes and I can feel the earth with my body. And Steiner says, well, yeah, if everything's just a mental picture, then you're having mental pictures of mental pictures. So he cuts down the critical idealist in this fashion, but he is for me, there is a reason why Schopenhauer is still being referenced as problematic and interesting, and I think it's for the exact reason that you're identifying here. Will and the bridge thinking between the bridge of feeling between thinking and will, these are the fundamental, they are our three soul aspects, and they have to meet somewhere. And Steiner is I'm going to park that question about Schopenhauer because I feel like I want to inform myself. All I can say is there's something is going on inside me that I can't find the language for, that says that Steiner is using Schopenhauer for a very important reason here, and it's because of the reality of the will. And perhaps one thought there as well, to like bring it slightly into the religious life, is I think one way of understanding, experiencing, gaining a fuller picture of what thinking, feeling, and living is from a religious perspective, or how it's reflected in religious truths is perhaps a better way to express it, is the idea of Father, will, Son, feelings, like the embodiment, the individualization, and the thinking is the Holy Spirit. And we have mentioned a couple of times, and I'm sure it's going to come up again in our conversations, but it's like the Holy Spirit aspect of thinking, which illuminates the world. These in the concept of the Trinity in Christianity, it's always stated these are three manifestations of the same. So like the Son isn't different from the Father, isn't different from the Logos. They are three different aspects of this same God aspect. And this is the picture for me. He's subtly communicating. To what extent my own biases are brought in there is difficult to know, but I think Schopenhauer and will, he's connecting these. It looks like something happened in your head.
Well,
or your heart, perhaps.
It's in my heart. Let's invoke Kate. Speaking of my heart, just kidding, Kate. The periphery and the center, and then the idea that the center is created in a sense by the periphery, but the center is the center. It's the center of all existence. Say, the
blind urge of will.
Going back to
blind urge. Sorry,
going back to where Steiner talks about feeling in thinking, he says explicitly you brought Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit, thinking, is the father of the Son, feeling. So, in other words, the Holy Spirit, as I think of it, is the individuated self on the periphery, and so the Son is the heart at the center, and the new Father is the periphery, not the Father God, say.
Mm-hmm.
So the Father is a unified multiplicity, something like that. So the other thing I want to bring in here is tying this into row, row, row your boat.
Go for it.
Life is but a dream.
Yeah.
And Ashton did a really good job of connecting the continuum between awakeness and sleep, say, and one could say there's a similar continuum between birth and death, or birth, or pre-birth and after death, say.
Help me remember that, Jeff. That moment where he made that connection.
He just did when he was doing the review. He just Steiner is not, again, refuting. This is really important. He's giving the ineffectual nature of viewing the world as a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream, dreaming the dream, sort of thing.
Yeah,
he does that, but he also holds the beautiful center of that, which is that thinking is to dreaming, as waking is to sleeping, and herein lies the feeling, because in this is kind of cheating, but let's bring in from other sources. Steiner describes the feeling life as a continuation of the dream life when we're sleeping. Mm-hmm. So it's the self same process. It's just it just conveys itself as feelings when we're awake.
When you're awake, yeah.
Yes, and so why do I bring that? I just leave that image. I don't really have a
okay.
I'll
add like a little bit to what you're saying, and if it helps you in your thinking, I'm not sure exactly where you're going, but when you were saying that relationship between feeling and the sleeping life, of course, another way of understanding that that if it is a truth is that when we dream, what we're doing is we are putting pictures to our feeling life, to our feeling experiences. Like as we run through the day, this isn't all that dreaming is about, but a large component of what we dream is based on like the experiences, the feeling experiences, the feeling reactions to the day's events, then get presented to me in cinematic form.
Yeah, I would say in motion picture form.
Yeah.
So yeah. You have then, this is where the mental picture comes in, because mental picturing is an imaginal process. And again, this is a tease because it goes all the way up to chapter 12, where he describes moral imagination and the epistemological and existential reality of moral imagination. And I would suggest that the dream life and the feeling life have their own rootedness in an ontological home that has its own laws associated with it. And this is why we get into what I would say Carl Jung is a transcendental realist. So so what he's done is to treat this phenomena very seriously, but at the bottom of that phenomena, he has a axiomatic limit, an axiomatic belief structure that limits that his entry into that ontological realm. And so that's it's outside the scope of this chapter, but it's a plausible claim that one could make as relates to the feeling and dreaming life and also then I think probably will hopefully, if not this time, next time, get into the Schopenhauer because he is and it's not on the tip of my tongue either, but he is celebrating Schopenhauer in the way that he does. He's the steel man the way that he does.
Yeah. And of course, it's just a random thought for some other conversation. Schopenhauer's impact on Nietzsche and Steiner's reverence for Nietzsche, or certain aspects of Nietzsche. They're like that, aren't they? Tightly knitted together. Okay, let's so Spinoza's stone. This for me was interesting. There's two things that I think that are interesting going on here. So he doesn't call it Spinoza's stone. That's me doing that. And Steiner is very economical with his use of metaphors, pictures to help us understand better. He often, continues to build on those pictures. And Spinoza's is very important in this conversation, because in chapter 2, we learned that we talked about how free necessity. Spinoza describes God as free due to this faculty of free necessity. And what does he mean by that? He means that a being is free if there is no exterior force obligating it to do something. It is acting entirely out of its own essence. And this essence, Spinoza doesn't attribute to human beings, but this is the concept of freedom that Steiner is going to run with. He's amplifying it. But of course, when he brings up Spinoza, he talks about Spinoza, the stone being thrown and thinking, deluding itself into being alive. And this is why we're talking about this whole process of knowledge. It seems it might be a long time ago. It might seem like a long time ago that we were talking about freedom, but this knowledge question that we're dealing with in these first 7 chapters is all working towards then unpacking freedom. Because Steiner said, if there are things, if we can't know why we do things, then we can never be free, because there can be what was that phrase he uses? That wonderful phrase, it's like the tyranny of unconscious ideas working within us. He doesn't use that language, but it's that idea that unless we know why we're doing things, we can never think or talk of being free beings. So that stone makes a return here in the chapter, but it's been endowed with a parabola. And Stein's making a very important point here. It's like a key point that the realists, the nominalists, fail to understand. The point he's making is that if a stone is thrown, then it will naturally have a parabolic curve as it's launched, and as it's descends down to earth again. And this concept of a parabola is inherent in the motion of that stone. The stone doesn't know anything about it, but nevertheless, it determines the action of this stone, or the flight path of this stone. And so in that sense, this concept is alive in the world. It is impacting the world. It has real effect. It has agency, should we call it. And human beings have the capacity to rediscover what is hidden in the percept. It's like this hidden aspect. It's not like the realists will have us believe we bolt on these things to nature, these thoughts that we have, these concepts. Concepts are not real. What's real is what's like comes to us through the senses. And Stein is pointing out, no. This is an absurdity. Everything in the world, a stone flying through the sky, there's a concept that's inherent to us, but it's actually our own organization, our own bodily, psycho-spiritual organization that pulls the two apart, so that if I can't think, I don't see the concept. I still see it obeying the laws of a parabolic curve, but I am completely oblivious to these laws. But the human being, by the grace of thinking, is able to recognize that truth that is out there in the world. But to do that, it has to create, it has to intuit this concept first before it will actually recognize it out in the world. So I think that's part of, I think that's why he's bringing in this stone again. He's being economical with his use of metaphors, but adding new important dimensions to how concepts are real in the world.
Yeah, that's the bringing Spinoza in this one is builds on what Jonathan discovered for at least for me, was that that Spinoza's God is us.
Jeff,
basically,
we've got a little problem. For some reason, your sound has gone really funny.
It's let me plug in and plug out again.
Okay. Yeah. Are you talking?
Hang on.
Okay.
Is that better?
Just talk for a little bit. I'm not sure.
Spinoza projection. No,
there's something. It's the same thing that Jonathan had the same problem.
How's that?
Carry on.
Can you hear me all right now?
No.
We've got a problem then.
How about you go out completely? I'll just keep on talking a little bit, and you try to re-enter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you in once you exited. Okay. Yeah, perhaps I'll just riff a little bit on Steiner's use of metaphors in the context of education. Being a teacher myself, when I did teacher training and I was introduced to, I introduced myself to Steiner's concepts on pedagogy. One of the ideas that really appealed to me was his idea of economics in the sense of using pictures with pupils that can grow, so that rather than as a teacher having to continually find new examples and new material, what instead you do is you revisit familiar terrain in whatever field you're looking at, and then discover it at a new level. And this is also something that I see Steiner doing repeatedly in this book. Spinoza is just one of these examples of how he is adding depth to something he's introduced us to earlier. And it takes a while to recognize that consciously what's going on, unless you've been already introduced to that concept. And I mean, I was introduced to that concept 20 plus years ago, but I've only actually really started becoming clearly aware of it on this reread. No, in fact, it started happening last reread when I started working a lot more intensively with it. Anyway, Jeff, you're back with us. Let's see how your sound is.
How does it sound now?
Oh yeah, man, you got
All
it
right.
going there. Did the trick.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Spinoza. Yes, but I just wanted to celebrate that. That's fantastic. And what you were just saying there, as relates to what we talked about before, in a sense, is this experiential organism that is taken on a life of its own, and is living. It's a living document. Say it's living text, like religious documents are. And again, I know that's going to be misinterpreted, or potentially misinterpretable, because for the same reason that love looks like ego in the world, it's not. So it's engaging, and it's engaging in ways that are organismic and but also architectural. So there's design associated with it, that's inherent to the design of human intelligence, or something like that. It is. Well, I was thinking.
I'd like to comment on something you said there, which I think is important to reflect on. That you and I are fully aware that some people watching this video are quite happy with mixing in anthroposophical thoughts, ideas, concepts taken from spiritual science, and that there are other people for whom perhaps anything post 1900 Steiner is an anathema. They think philosophy of freedom. They recognize the immense value of this work, but they have a problematic relationship with anthroposophy and spiritual science. We recognize that, but we don't share it. For myself, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's anthroposophy is part of what helps me to engage even more deeply into the philosophy of freedom. And it's interesting in that way, us human beings are very different. I've met a few people who so they say, why do you have to bring into like all this anthroposophy and spiritual science stuff when it's like true freedom is in the philosophy of freedom? And that's their perspective. I don't share it, but I recognize that it's out there.
I also recognize that it's possible to read philosophy of freedom as a living document without any relationship to the spiritual research that the book serves as an epistemological foundation for. It's just that those things are rather than you begin to see the world rather than from a posited or a belief system reality, but as that those things become unnecessary, and in fact are increasingly, as we've touched upon in previous talks, antithetical to knowing, and are increasingly make knowing more and more difficult. Yes, there's so much here as relates to the subjective experience and the crucial nature of that subjective experience as a building of a symbol. And you can't you can't make up languages, you can't make up religions, and you can't make up symbols. The symbols are not metaphors, they're not transference, they're not analogies. they're representatives. They're representative of reality in a way that are themselves real. And so this is what we're doing this is what he's suggesting in this chapter, is that's what we're doing when we take we take the world inside us as a percept, and we participate in the way in which that world the way in which it is uniquely human to transform the world that we're in. So we see this in our economy, we see this in our life. Generally speaking, we not only we're not satisfied in not knowing it, we're not satisfied with it the way it is, and we want to change it. And if we don't take up the subjective process, then we'll not notice the noodling that we're doing while we won't notice the consequences and damage. Here again comes consequentiality. And so it's a personal responsibility of every single individual, I will claim, to take up the subjective process as a knowing, as a process of transformation of knowing into a living internal symbol that gives you the world and represents the world to other people at the same time.
Yeah, a living relationship to that area of soul, which is creating us.
Yeah, well, it's a spiritualizing also of the feeling and the willing life. So
yeah.
if we mean by spirit what Spinoza means by spirit, which I believe we do, it's that which doesn't depend on anything. That which self-determines, which doesn't mean that it's not interdependent with other self-determining beings, which is it's just not codependent with them.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So Steiner, next part, he then sort of like takes us off like into the realms of like time and space briefly. And again, this is like a bit of a mystery as to what is going on. But as you dig deeper into it, this is one of those growth moments when he's really like hammering down hard on how we are, how our Dasein, how our being is determined by, or our perceptual content is determined by time and space. And in that sense, we are finite beings. We are little specks on this periphery, and we're just seeing a little moment of time and a tiny little fraction of the universe, all of which can make you feel possibly like small and insignificant. Or alternatively, it can make you feel like you're part of something that's absolutely amazingly, fantastically large and infinite. But to get to that positive side of it, it's you do it consciously. You can do it through the feeling life. You can feel that connection. And with your will life, you can impact that world. But you can only know about it consciously through thinking. Sorry, misspoke. You can only know about it at a conscious level through thinking. And he strongly like bounces around this idea between finite being and the infinite being of thinking, that this is the faculty of soul, this is the area of soul in which we reconnect with the whole. If we are stuck in our feelings, we can no, that's not even true what I was about to say. Our thinking and the conceptual framework that we have of the world also determines the scope of our feeling. If we believe that's like we're like this little tiny speck in the universe, and I'm just like a few atoms and that type of thing, that will have a consequence on my feeling life. Whereas if I describe myself, to make reference to what the image that Kate brought up in the group yesterday, that's like we're dotted around the periphery here, and between us we're mapping out this amazing universe, this life experience that we're having. So like seeing it from different angles. If that is part of my conceptual framework, then I can pour my feelings into that and feel the joy. And Ashton was also talking about this as well, wasn't he, in his presentation? This joy that I can feel, but it is based in like the conceptual life that I have about life. If I have an impoverished concept life, my feeling life is also impoverished. I don't think I'm overstepping the mark if I say that. What do you think?
I think that's a really good way to put it when you use the term scope, because there's so much there. I don't believe that. So this leads to some speculation. Not speculation is not the right word. Some questions about where collective intelligence comes in here and what it is. And I don't believe it is distributed in the way that cognitive science talks about it. Although they're getting close to the consciousness, say, that exists in the sort of just across the threshold in the imaginal, say. And so I don't believe that that we are points on the periphery that have to share intellectual perspectives in order to get to the center. I believe the center is being created on the periphery. And belief is not the right word. The center is being created on the periphery just as the blood is forming the heart in the embryo. And while that process is going on, we're giving rise in the center to something that we all can perceive from the particular point of view we have simultaneously, and that collective intelligence is that. But we have to actually get to the point of being on the periphery. In other words, and looking to the center and participating in the rhythmic pulsation to bring the center to sort of to conjure the center into its full being, say. How does that land?
It's a beautiful image of, I think, something that we talked about it earlier. It's like this experience of learning together in a group. This is another aspect, I think, of exactly what you're describing there. It's a symbiosis. It is not, as you say, just an exchange of information. It's the feeling of growing together, creating something more complete, that we, by sharing with each other, and Max talked, I thought, eloquently about this as well in the talk yesterday, this creating of community around this book it's such a special experience. It really is. I've had a lot of wonderful experiences in my life. This is something very different for me, very special.
Yeah, there's this goes to your finite being in space and time, and the necessity that you're a finite being in space and time in order to engage that part of you that is not a finite being in space and time. And I always think of I often think in the imagery that arises out of this book of God, and is it David that are
Adam, where the fingers connecting.
Adam, yes. Yeah. The as above so below picture comes. Anything that the spirit touches becomes spiritualized. The co-creative process of what it is to be, the heritage of what it is to be a human being, uniting with that which creates, say. Yeah.
I put together some quotes that I've mentioned it a couple of times in passing. This how I think the Upanishads are a very interesting side read to what's going on in the philosophy of freedom, because they're getting it an essential truth about the nature of life, but particularly on this question of finite and infinite. It's really struck me the last couple of weeks how they have this very vivid way of talking about the infinite, which to me, from my own experience, I'm not saying it doesn't exist out there in everyday life, but my own experience of it is it's not there. So when I read this type of content, it creates this inner joy, this feeling of connection. So I thought I would give a few examples of how people in the past, there are a couple of other examples in here as well, how they describe this relation to the infinite, this infinite being, that this thinking activity is that by which we can reconnect to the infinite. That's our spiritual heritage. And I think some of these words that are coming up are speaking to exactly that idea, this central part of the first, and actually the whole book. I was going to say the first 7 chapters of the book, but she rightly say it's like, what is moral imagination? Yeah, but we won't go there yet. So I'm just going to read them, and then see if they spark off any thoughts in you or me. Okay. So these are actually taken from the introduction to this version of the Upanishads, written by a guy called Juan Mascaro, with the name at the bottom here, is truly sublime. But so these bits are actually taken from the introduction, not from the Upanishads. They're coming up. So people think that Tao is foolishness because it lacks definition. But Tao lacks definition because it is infinite. If Tao could be defined, it would be small and not great. In Coleridge, it was nice to have a modern reference to this, also from the introduction. The primary imagination I hold to be the living power and the prime agent of all human perception, and as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. And then also, our souls long for freedom. And where can the finite find freedom except in the infinite? Where can the bird in a cage find freedom except in the infinite sky? They're all talking, aren't they, to this longing for freedom, and that it is found in the infinite. And this is what Steiner is mapping out for us, our relationship to thinking when we have a more complete understanding, a phenomenology of what thinking actually is. We are slowly swimming out into this infinite realm, slowly and carefully, because we can make lots of mistakes along the way, but that's where we're heading in this book. Shall I continue reading, or would you like to reflect?
The first one, the people think that Tao is foolishness. Tao lacks definition because it's infinite. It would be small, not great. Okay, so there's the if it's everything, why would it be small? And it puts me in mind of Steiner said it somewhere. If you could see the eye, if you could view the eye, if you could perceive the eye, you'd be very disappointed. It's not much, right? And and then we move to Coleridge, and we have an individuation in the I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that the infinite is wrapped up in that which is
the finite mind.
The seed, maybe that's what is an image. So these are just impressions. And obviously the bird in the cage and freedom is you could say the opposite with that last one in a sense, because if everything is infinite, then where is your horizon? Where do you gain traction? Where's the ground of existence if everything is infinite? You could say that the freedom is flying into the infinite sky, maybe, but you could also say that the finite is the ground out of which freedom is possible. Without the finite, we wouldn't be able to be free, right? And maybe that's actually what he's saying there in the end. But I think and where can the finite find freedom, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's in the infinite.
So yeah, it connects deeply for me. The other thing that won't be obvious to a listener is that, I mean, so many nights I've fallen asleep to these. There's this many years ago, I found there's a lady called Tessa Morgan who rendered the Upanishads. She took Mascaro's translations, so she was already off to a good start. But she reads them in this slow, like deliberate voice. And when you've listened to these perhaps like hundreds of times, they sink in at another level. And sometimes they come to life in a new way, and an intuition happens. If I can actually describe that process, I decided last year, it might be 2 years ago now, I can't remember, but I decided to memorize the first Upanishad, which is called the Isa Upanishad, because Gandhi had an interesting statement to make about it. He said, if all of the literature, so the whole of Hinduism was suddenly to disappear off the face of the earth, and all the books and all the wisdom, all you would have to do is have the first 4 lines of the Isha Upanishad, and you would be able to recreate the whole wisdom of inherent in Hinduism. So it's this wonderful quote. So that was part of the reason why I decided to memorize it. And then when I go out for a walk in the forest, I sort of I'm reliving this poem. It's only 2 pages long, so it's nothing excessive. But again, this is one of those processes that you repeat something at the same content enough times, intuition comes along and makes a link, augments your understanding, so that something is born out of nothing. You've got this foundation of the finite, this foundation of the passage, the words from the Isa, but they are gaining in significance for you the whole time. And it comes in fits and bursts. Sometimes you can do it for a week or two, and it's like it's almost mechanical. It is never mechanical, I have to admit, but you don't have these, what I would call perhaps breakthrough moments, where perhaps there's a passage where you've read it and you think you've understood it in a certain way, and you have, but then a new dimension is added to it. It's like you focus on one of the words for some reason that you can't perhaps properly explain, and then all of a sudden it takes on a new significance. So I recognize that I've got perhaps a different relationship to the average Westerner here to the Upanishads.
I'd just like to accentuate the importance of what you just were saying, because we can go back to chapter 1, I believe it is, or chapter 2, where he talks about plausible ways of knowing, all three being I suggested are part and parcel of this work. Some would say it's the latter that is predominant, but I'm not so sure about that as I read through it this time. And you're describing a religious experience, a religious way of knowing through ritual and chanting, and so you're opening a door for something to enter that say maybe alights in your soul as an intuition. So it's revelation. Say religion is based on revelation, I would argue. Incantation and calling forth, and what we're talking about is the periphery, and the center is a version of this. It's the way creation works, right? It's and so we're sidling up to that process in a rhythmic way, just like the rhythm of the blood forms the heart. and then there's the artistic way of knowing, which is being a creator of concepts, or a creator of participating in the creation of a altered subjective self, not an abstract ego, but that. And then there's the methodology that is that's utilized to remove presumptions, use the actual scientific methodology on the phenomena that play out, say, artistically and religiously and through disciplined thinking.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that insight, Jeff. I hadn't connected that there. It's funny. I wouldn't describe myself as a religious person, but when you describe it like that, yep, I am.
Yeah, religion has taken on a pretty bad name, I'd say. And so when I mention religion, I might say it two different ways. I might say scientism is a kind of religion. It has all of the doctrinal stuff and dogma and the sort of songs, and no, they don't sing. The humorlessness, the way in which they circle around ideas, and so there's that sort of side of science, but then there's also the religio, as like Vervaeke talks about. That's what we might call spiritual, but
connecting with something, connecting with life. Okay, next one. This is another book written by the same guy, which is like a compilation of loads of different traditions, Upanishads, Confucius, Christianity, lots of really. I haven't read the whole book, but there's lots of you can get the PDF for free online. Also, this is potent reading for people looking for clear imagery for how other people in the past have experienced what I think we're going through, this gradual, this slow, methodical spiritual awakening. And here he's picked so many examples of people like slowly waking up and how it transforms them. So it's a wonderful book. And on the next slide, there's going to be another picture which will deepen the story on the lamps of fire, which I also discovered this week. Anyway, so a couple of direct quotes from the Upanishads, which I think we'll also recognize when we read the philosophy of freedom, because we believe that I feel sure through my thinking process that I am slowly opening myself up to this infinite universal activity in me. I experience that. That's not a matter of belief. That's a direct experience. Where it will end, then I have to talk about beliefs. But where I am now, it's real. So these two Upanishads, one of them from the Katha Upanishad: narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and yet they all tell us that this narrow path leads to infinite freedom. And the second one from the Mundaka Upanishad: he is beyond thought and invisible, beyond family and colour. He has neither eyes nor ears. He has neither hands nor feet. He is everlasting and omnipresent, infinite in the great and infinite in the small. He is the eternal, whom the sages see as the source of all creation. On the narrow path angle, I remember also as a young guy being given the book The Road Less Travelled by somebody, Peck. Do you recognize the title? M.
Scott Peck.
M. Scott Peck. That's right. And it does feel like a very narrow path. There's not many people that sort of like go that are treading it with me, if you see what I mean. Although that perspective is changing now. That path has become a little bit wider, thanks to Matt and Ashton's initiative, the conversations with you, and then how this channel is beginning to grow. It's becoming a little broader, I think.
A little what?
Broader.
Yeah. It's maybe since the path is the it leads through the subjective self in a certain respect. It gets what do they say? It becomes more arduous, more thorny, more narrow. But perhaps you just what pulls you forward is when sharing this work is that which is being conjured at the center, and you have new resolve associated with it, and new trust in yourself, and confirmation, affirmation is with people on that path.
I'm
so
not going mad.
I think it, yeah, right. Or is this just intellectual, or is it in whatever? Is it just philosophizing into thin air? And
yeah, exactly.
No, it's a narrow path, and it's narrowing, but not because we're all going through the same path, but because we all are going through different paths, which is the uniqueness of your own individuating experience.
Okay, let's move to, I think this is second to last one. So first of all, I put a little picture of the Beatles there. George Harrison, he received a copy of the book, The Lamps of Fire, and the B-side on the single Lady Madonna is called The Inner Light, which was George Harrison's own rendering of his experience of reading that book. I did have a listen to it. I do like George Harrison, or I like some of his work. I think he's the Beatles. I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself, isn't it? It's like the impact, it's like their spiritual significance, not because they were necessarily. Let's not go there. They are deeply interesting. Let's just leave it there. But George Harrison is like particularly interesting from that perspective, how he was the guy that got them interested in transcendental meditation and blah, 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 blah. So if I didn't actually think this song wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I much preferred reading the parts of the book that I did than listening to this song. So, but people might feel tempted to look it up on YouTube because it's there. Okay, so the two quotes, one from the Svetasvatara Upanishad. But there is the God of forms infinite, and when a man knows God, he is free from all bondage. He is the creator of all, ever living in the mystery of his creation. He is beyond beginning and end, and in his glory all things are.
That's the word you were looking for earlier, not tyranny. There's a God but there is the God of forms, infinite, and when a man knows God, he is free from all bondage. In other words, when you know where your knowing comes from, you're not bound to, you're not under the bondage of a tyrannical system of thoughts, say.
You freely choose to do the things that you do because you know. Put very simplistically,
you know with that which is beyond beginning and end. It's self-determining.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure this is something that people who are adherents to the religion would say, but
yeah, because there's a lot more focus on obedience to God and obedience to norms. But we'll get there in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a real humdinger from that perspective, I think. Okay, next one. Maitri Upanishad. Even as water becomes one with water, fire with fire, and air with air, so the mind becomes one with the infinite mind, and thus attains final freedom. Mind is indeed the source of bondage and also the source of liberation. To be bound to things of this world, this is bondage. To be free from them, this is liberation. It sounds like the same guy that wrote The Philosophy of Freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah, that could be the last paragraph in the Philosophy of Freedom, you could say.
It's so succinct.
Even as water becomes one with water, fire with fire, and air with air. This really puts me in mind, actually, of the Four Mothers and the beginnings of Riddles of Philosophy when he's talking about Pythagoras and what's his name?
Anaxagoras?
No. Pherecydes.
Pherecydes,
and that they were experiencing with the water within them, the fire within them, the fire, the air within them, the air, and so their mind was conjoined with the infinite mind, and so much so that Pythagoras needed to start a secret school,
gentleman's club,
in order to and hopefully humans club. Hopefully, probably. I don't know. I have no idea what was like at that time. But exactly, because it's a little bit prehistorical in a certain sense of what we mean when we say historical. But in any case, this is no need for controversy. It's the beauty of it hangs there in that the one mind becomes the infinite mind, just as fire knows fire, and right. And so there's no inherent separations there, but I would say then, if this were written now, it would have to be written. Well, it's there. I mean, if it's written now, it would have to say the mind is indeed the source of bondage, and also the source of liberation. That's philosophy of freedom right there in a nutshell, as far as I'm concerned.
And part of the bondage holding us in place are the limiting perspectives of realism and idealism, specifically to this chapter that we've been reading. Okay.
Yeah.
And final slide. Sorry, go on. Did you want to add something?
Realism is, yeah. Okay, we're good.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last ones. So from the Chandogya Upanishad, in the same way, when the soul is in silent quietness, it arises and leaves the body, and, reaching the Spirit Supreme, finds there its body of light. It is the land of infinite liberty. And then a final one from Mr. Mascaro himself. The silent voice of the Eternal is perpetually whispering in us his melodies, everlasting. The radiance of the infinite is everywhere, but our ears cannot hear and our eyes cannot see. The Eternal, like a concept, cannot be grasped by the transient senses or the transient mind.
Interesting, the use of the transient mind and the transient senses, because of the way in which the mind can transcend the transient, and the way in which the senses themselves are actually, in the sense of the higher senses, are unmediated knowledge. So they're not transient, though the ways in which we look through the five senses are binding of the mind.
Until we learn of the true relationship of thinking to perception. Yeah. Okay. It's that was really enjoyed that one again, Jeff. We've done 2 hours this time. We've done a few more minutes than our normal.
Wow.
I'll press pause.
All right.
Or not, I'll press stop even.